So at this point, you hopefully have received some awesome renderings from your designer. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna use these renderings to get some feedback, and we're gonna learn how to do that in a structured manner. So let's jump into it. And the first thing that we need to consider is secrecy. And here I would say that there are two very distinct paths that we can go down. And the first one would be to run a very small focus group with people who have all signed NDAs beforehand. And that way we would maintain our rights for patents, because we wouldn't make our ideas and designs public. And patents, they can be extremely important, especially if you're selling through Amazon, because at least as of right now, Amazon most often sides with the patent holder without going into a lot of investigation. So let's say that you have an FBA store that's selling a product and you're doing great, but then a competitor, a copycat, comes along and starts selling the same product. Well then, if you actually have a design patent or a utility patent for your product, then you can file a complaint with Amazon and they would remove this copycat store from their website. And this is definitely a very powerful intellectual property protection tool that you have access to as an Amazon seller. And then of course outside of Amazon you could access lawyers to shut down a copycat store as well. However, there are very significant downsides to only showing your idea to a small set of people who have signed NDAs. And the downside is that you will gather much less feedback, and the quality of feedback that you get can suffer. And that you gather much less feedback, I think that will come as no surprise to people, right? If you just send it out to everybody, then you can gather more feedback than if you have to have everybody sign an NDA. But I think the part of the quality suffering can come as a surprise. And the reason for why I say that the quality can suffer is because you run into the issue of having to untwine what people say from what they actually think. And people in your very tight survey group might say that they love your product and that they would buy it, but you will never really know for sure. On the other hand, if you choose to forego your patent rights and choose to share your concept online with relevant communities, you will get very, very raw data. You will get very rough feedback, because online, people don't care what you think generally. So people will be very direct and really tell you how it is. And this can hurt, but it is also very, very useful to not waste time on bad ideas. And apart from being able to gather very raw feedback when you share online, you will also be able to gauge the virality factor of your product. So let's say that you share it online and that you get a lukewarm response, where you get some likes, you get some comments, but it's not really taking off. Then perhaps the concept lacks that wow factor that we discussed in the lesson on idea validation. And as you might remember from that lesson, this wow factor, it is especially important if you're selling outside of Amazon, because people there need higher interest to actually put down an order. Now, which one of these two paths will be best for you in terms of secrecy? It will really depend on what type of product you are creating and what your strategy for selling that product is. But in general, I would say that if you plan on selling on Amazon, then most likely it will be worth investing that extra time and money into keeping your product idea secret and getting at least a design patent. And then if you're planning on selling outside of Amazon, then I think the main factors that you should be considering are: number one, whether or not you think that your idea merits a utility patent, because as we discussed before, utility patents, they are much more easy to enforce than design patents. So if you believe there is potential for that, then that's one more reason to go with the more secretive feedback gathering route. Then the second consideration would be how much money you actually have. So are you willing and able to invest for a full patent? Do you have what it takes to actually enforce that patent? So that's the second consideration. And then the third consideration I would say is how much time you have. So keeping the project secret, it will likely increase the amount of iterations it will take to get to a perfect design because of the lower quality feedback that we discussed. And also the patent application process will likely take time. So these two things combined will likely lead to your product hitting the market at a later stage than if you would share it publicly to gather feedback. And based on these factors, you'll have to make a decision on how you want to proceed. And in this lesson, we will cover both of the options. So the first option, that is to gather feedback publicly. And that is what I did for the beach bug, which we have discussed a little bit in previous lessons. And it worked out really well. So if you look at the final concept here and how the product looked, it was very, very different from where I started out with. And all of these changes, they were based on feedback that I got in Facebook groups and on Reddit. And in this case, the first place where I shared the early concepts that I have shown you was actually the Barcelona subreddit. Because as I discussed before, Barcelona, they have a huge crime problem here, and there's a lot of theft on the beach. So people on that subreddit would definitely be in the target demographic of this device. And just from that first post, I gathered a ton of valuable feedback on things that I needed to change with the concept. So, for example, people thought that the battery should be rechargeable instead of just a single-use battery as I had it in this concept. People wanted there to be some level of waterproofing, and that's not possible with this design that I'm showing right now. Then people also complained that the thief would probably simply remove the alarm from the bag, throw it away, and then just keep walking with the bag. So I needed to find some kind of solution that was better than these little cute magnets, which I had thought were a perfect solution up until this point. And apart from that, there were also some other minor points that people complained about that I decided to change for the second iteration. So all in all, this one post on Reddit really made me reconsider a lot of things that I had been taking for granted with the design concept. And the second version, once I got that ready and posted it, it was much better received. And also people loved that they have had a chance to actually help me out and improve upon the idea. And I think that some of the learnings I could probably have avoided by doing more research up front, but for the most part I think that people need a rendering of the type that I've shown in this lesson to be able to provide feedback of the quality level that I got, feedback that I could actually use to improve upon my product idea. Okay, so how do we do one of these posts? Well, number one, we need to select where to make the post, of course. And here we can use subreddits, we can use Facebook groups, or also you can actually reach out to the people from your customer research and ask them again. And hopefully you did some surveys and gathered maybe some emails from that survey, or you still have contact information to the people that you interviewed. So you can just reach out to those people again, and they will often be very happy to help because, as I said, people love feeling involved in the design process and feel that what they are saying is actually influencing a real product out in the world. Then number two, once you have selected where you want to share your concept, then it's time to create a post which clearly describes exactly what your product does. And remember to add any arrows and explanatory text to the images so that just by looking at the images, it is absolutely clear what this product is and what it does. And to add any graphics, you can either use Illustrator if you're on Windows, or you could use Preview if you're on Mac, which allows you to do this very easily. And of course, if you'd rather not do it yourself, you can always ask your designer to do it for you. Then once you have posted your concept, then comes the very fun and heart-wrenching experience of waiting and seeing how it does. And here I just want to say, if you don't get a bunch of uplikes and upvotes right away, don't despair, because oftentimes you will need to post it in a couple of different communities before you get a response. I have had concepts myself that I have posted in 4 different subreddits, and then in one of these subreddits it would be the most upvoted concept of the month or this last 6 months, while in the other 2 it would be barely registered. So don't despair and just wait a little bit to see how it does, and then if there's no signal at all, try posting it in another community. And now just a couple of words about what type of mentality I usually try to maintain as I listen to feedback online. Because as mentioned, it can be very harsh and it's sometimes difficult to filter out the noise from the signal. So first off, I definitely try to keep an open mind and be open to revisiting any of my core assumptions around what the product should be. I am also on the lookout for patterns, so I try to see what is behind each person's comment. Is there a common concern maybe about the concept? Is there a common request of an additional feature that the concept should have? So I try to find these patterns and write them down if I think that they are useful. But at the same time, don't feel that you need to take everything that people say in the comment section as gospel. because frankly, many times people will be giving you very, very bad advice and requesting features that make no sense or that will be impossibly expensive to implement. So just because one person mentions something, you don't need to feel that you need to implement it into your product. Evaluate whether that fits the core idea of your product, and if it does not, just disregard it. And at the outset of creating this lesson, I actually thought about creating a template which you could use for this first social media post with your concept. But after thinking about it more, I think that any templated message is really bound to fail, because online people, communities, they just hate when it's clear that the poster goes in without knowing anything about where they are posting, anything about the etiquette that exists in that community. So don't go in with a templated message, but instead really try to research this subreddit or this Facebook group and then customize it to that group. So keep it very human. Don't come off as a big corporation or as a small corporation for that matter. Just say it how it is. You're an entrepreneur and this is a product that you have been working on for a while, and you really think that it could help this community, and you're looking for their very genuine and open feedback for how you can improve on this idea. Alright, so now we have discussed the public route where we show our concept on Facebook and Reddit and perhaps other places online, and we gather a lot of feedback. And now let's talk instead about the second option that we have, the route of secrecy. And in many ways, this will be very similar to what we did in the customer interviews during the research phase. So if you have not watched that lesson yet, please go back and do so before continuing. Now, the first thing that we need to do is to gather at least 7 participants to provide feedback on your product concept. And the reason for why I'm going with the number 7 here is because that in my experience, once you go above 7, you start to get rapidly diminishing returns on the type of information that your research participants give you. So if you're able to gather 10 people or 12 people, or maybe even 14 people, that is great, but I would say that you should at least get 7 people to participate in this part of your research. Now, before we were doing both surveys and interviews in the customer research, but for this stage I would advise to only do the interviews, because surveys, they are not that good at providing a lot of detail, and people will mostly write 1 or 2 words in the answers, and that's not enough to understand what works and what does not work with your current product concept. Depending on how many people you know in the targeted customer market, it might be a very easy or a very difficult task to gather these 7 participants for your customer interviews. And the easiest thing, I think, would be to go to friends and family and ask them to participate. However, friends and family, they are extremely biased, so I would definitely try to avoid involving them. Instead, I would go to acquaintances and the friends of friends, which do not have a very strong relationship with ourselves, so that they feel comfortable providing very honest feedback. And also, as mentioned before, you can reach out to people from the customer research that you did before and ask them to participate in this second round of interviews. And if you still have issues finding these participants after talking with acquaintances and after reaching out to the people who did customer research with you before, then it might be time to get creative and reach out to local meetup groups. So let's say, for example, that you're making some hiking gear equipment. Then you could find a meetup group in your city that is gathering around hiking and connect with people there. And of course, this takes time and energy, but in the end, I think the effort is worth it, because the feedback that you can get, it can save you so much time and so much money by not having you go down the wrong path. Alright, so now let's imagine that you have found these at least 7 participants. Then, of course, it's time to have them all sign an NDA before you can disclose anything about what you're working on. And the interview format itself, it will be very similar to what we did before. So I'll attach the same template in this lesson, but there will be the important difference of having you introduce the concept towards the end of the interview. So if it is the first time that you're talking with this person, as before, we want to keep the interview very broad to not be very leading with our questions. We want to really understand as much as possible about the customer. And then just towards the end, we want to introduce our concept and ask them what they think about it. What doubts do they have about the concept? Do they feel something is missing from the product? And also you can ask if they saw this in a store, what is the price that they would imagine being on the price tag? So this is a little bit different from the question of what would you pay for this product, because it's more of the price is right question, right? You're just asking them to guess what this would be priced in a store. And before asking all of these questions, I would definitely make sure that they understand that what they are about to see, it's a very early concept still, and that the purpose right now, it's not to validate the concept that you're seeing, right? The purpose is actually to find issues with it and find opportunities for improvement. The point is that they need to feel completely comfortable saying whatever is on their mind. And as you are conducting these interviews, one thing that is very likely to happen is that the person that you are talking with starts to come with a lot of suggestions for features that would improve the product. And while this is actually a good sign, it means that they are engaged and that they really want to help and that they care about the product, I would at the same time not focus too much on the suggestions for features. Because the truth is, like when I talked about the comment section online, people are really bad at giving suggestions for features because there's just so many things to consider around engineering, around pricing, and just feasibility that most advice that you will get, it's not that useful. So for that reason, I would try to avoid spending too much time on discussing features and instead focus on discussing issues, because problems, that is where they are the expert, right? They are not the expert in creating new solutions, they are the expert in actually knowing what their own pain points are. So for that reason, that is where you also want to spend the majority of your time in the interview. And now let's finish off with the task here. So the task will be very straightforward, and that will be to gather feedback on the concept renderings that you now have, and to do that through a public or a non-public method as we have discussed. And which one of those you choose, that's an important decision that you will need to put some thought into, but do consider all of the points that we have mentioned in this video. So with that, good luck, and I'll see you in the next lesson where we will learn some more analytical tools for getting feedback on our concept.